It is the end of the 2024 legislative session, and we also say goodbye to one legislator who has represented Polk County for 18 years. Though being a state representative is only one accomplishment of many of Akeo Abdul-Samad. Akeo, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Thank you so much for joining us. And you've had, like we've said, 18 years of dedicated service to the legislature. As you look back at your time, how do you feel about it?
I feel good. When I first came on the Hill, of course, I was new. I was a newbie, as we say. And so it was like going to a college campus every morning. And I was going to class, and I was learning. And I left there realizing that I still hadn't graduated. So, I'm still learning, because that's what life is about, is being, a lifelong student. And that's what the legislators that I met with, that I became colleagues with, that I became friends with, means a great deal to me, and I would miss them.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about, do you have a legislative session you would say was the most difficult for you, and why is that?
I think the first one, was the most difficult, because that was when the Democrats, the power changed hands. Republicans were in control for the 10 years before that. So when I came in, we were the majority. And I believe it was a learning process for my colleagues that have been there. And so it was a serious learning process for me, because of the fact that we were just learning how to govern again. So I came in on that bottom floor and was on a learning curve with a lot of my colleagues. And so I was more quiet than I was, talkative or even thinking about trying to submit bills.
And how did you come about to use that voice? Or when did you start feeling comfortable enough to be declarative about what you want to see happen in Iowa?
Well, I got there because Ed Fallon, who was in District 66 at that time, decided to run for governor. And him and several others came to me and said, Akeo, it'd be great if you ran. And of course I said no. Because I really didn't want to. I was on the school board at that time. But then he put that caveat out there for me, because it's about the babies for me. It's about supporting especially our students and teachers. And he said, they determine how much money the school districts get in the House. So as soon as he said that, it snapped. I said, okay, what do I have to do to run? So going there and getting involved, my target was like, let me learn a process, because I want to make sure that we get the schools some money. And we were able to fund schools. When I got there, we were in the majority. We were able to raise the minimum wage. So there was things that we were able to do. So I was really excited, and because I had never been in the minority before. So, those first couple of years for me was just, yes, we're not going to play the game, we're going to change the game. And I was so excited, we're going to change this game. The babies are going to get funded, we're going to get school books into the school, updated school books, we're going to do all of this. And then, 2010, I think it was, I realized what it was to be in a minority. But at first I got a little bummed. Because, you got to understand, I had that excitement those first 2 years. And then going into minority, I really had to learn how to work across the aisle. And that became another life lesson for me.
Talk to me about that. How was that, extending yourself to the other side to try to create change?
Well, first of all, I had to realize where people were at. And we were dealing with a lot of rural legislators. We were dealing with other urban legislators, of course. But their perception of what a Muslim was something that I had to realize, that we had to educate each other And so it was meeting individuals where they were at. In fact, one of the situations that was really contentious was the imam. You know, we get to invite people to come up and open with prayer, and I invited the imam to come, but I also invited a rabbi and a Christian preacher, because it was about unity for me. Yeah, and they had not known at that point that I had invited a rabbi and a Christian preacher, but the imam gave, you know, the prayer. Make a long story short, it upset some people. And at that time, the leader asked me if I wanted to do a point of personal privilege and deal with that. So I did, because I thought it was an educational moment, you know. And oh my God, it was educational, but it blew up, you know, because individuals started talking about the Iraqi war, you know, individuals had children that were in there, you know, and they weren't happy. So it led to a point of knowing that it was a lot of work to do. And so it was me being able to say, I still want to reach across the aisle, you know. Because my thing is, if we understand each other's differences, we don't have to agree, but if we understand them, then our similarities have substance. And so that's what I put in my mind, and that's the premise I started doing the work, and start building those relationships. And through the course of the year, when I left and giving my last speech and the last night, you know, the formula worked, yeah. You know. So it was respect on both sides, you know, and I had built friendships, you know, with Republicans and Democratic colleagues.
Why do you think that's so important? I mean, the primaries are in June. There's new people looking to come in. What do you want to tell them about that process?
I want to tell them that put people first and put politics third, fourth, and fifth. You know, don't even make it your second, because we're there to serve the people. In fact, there was one of my Republican colleagues that came to me, and he said, do you remember what you said to me when I got here? We were on the education committee together. And of course, you know, I'm older, so no, I didn't quite remember everything, but he said, we were put on subcommittees together. He said he doesn't know how that happened, but we were. He said, and 99% of the time, we agreed. And he said, I brought that to you. And all you did, you looked at me and said, the reason why that happens isn't because you're Republican, I'm Democrat, because we put the people first. And he said, I've never forgotten that. And I say that to those who are coming in, put the people first. You know, it's not about what party you represent. It's about the people you represent. Yeah, and that's what we have to be able to look at, because we're all up there and we have our constituents, and they put us there for a reason, to be their voice. So we need to be their voice and be able to serve them, you know, the best way we can.
Sometimes that's easier said than done, I'm sure, as you've experienced. Can you talk to me about a time of a piece of legislation that maybe passed or maybe didn't pass that troubles you and still kind of keeps you up at night, for lack of better terms?
Just recently, actually, you know, before this session, I wrote a piece of legislation, you know, with the help, of course, of the staff, that was talking about gun safety in the schools. And I got pushback, not only from my Democratic colleagues, but from my Republican colleagues, because here I am, I'm saying, I want to teach from elementary to high school, gun safety. And the bill was there and the pushback was there. It never got passed. You know, the following year, my Republican colleagues presented it, you know, and I went sponsored with the individual on the Republican side. It still never got passed. But it is something that I think at some point we have to look at, you know, and it's not just to me passing legislation to say teachers should be able to carry guns. That's not even where my legislation was at. You know, that wasn't even a focus. My legislation was, how do we teach children what to do, when they're in the park or they're around or at home and they find a gun. What do you do? And it's teaching kids, and they have a program. In fact, the NRA has a program called Eddie Eagle. Now, it depends where you go to get your statistics. Some people say it doesn't work. Other people say it does. We did, a group. We had a focus group of 4 focus groups, and we used Eddie Eagle to teach in that. And, it was profound because it's animated. And so the kids loved it, with the eagle. And a lot of kids were saying how they felt, and they knew what to do now if they found a gun. So we need to teach, as we need to. That never got off the ground, and I still think about that, especially when there's a shooting, especially when you're dealing with children bringing guns to school. We need to be able to focus on that, to give the young people who want to go to the principal, who want to go to a teacher, who want to even peer, mentoring is so important, that want to go to their peer and say, you shouldn't have this gun here. Let me go with you, turn it in. That type of thing.
Is there anything that throughout your career that, apart from that, positive that you feel like a law that you made a change and that sticks with you?
I think a more perfect union, was excited. I get chill bumps, when I think about that, because that was during the George Floyd incident, and our streets in Des Moines, as well as other, cities in the nation, young people are protesting. And out of that, working with the young people, and I call them game changers, working with legislators, working with both parties and the governor, we were able to go into the meetings and start negotiating what can we do, to make Iowa. And what came out of that was a more perfect union. That more perfect union took that negotiation. We were able to sit down at the table, and within 2 weeks we passed some significant legislation. That was the first time, in years that I ever been to see a bill, negotiated, come to the table, hit both the Senate and the House, and hit the governor's desk in 2 weeks' time. That was phenomenal to me. But it took communicating. We all had to communicate. And no, did the Democrats and myself get everything we want? Did the Republicans and them get everything we want? No. But it was a bill that served the people of Iowa. So that was exciting to me. Anything else, it's all exciting, but that is something that I could always use and talk about how Iowa came together, how individuals came together and made it better for Iowa.
I know the primaries are a little bit of ways, but they're right around the corner. Is there anybody you're looking to endorse?
I have already. One of the things, and I really want to be clear with this, because some people got mad at me because I did, but people have to understand that there's a few legislators that are there now that I was part of their mentoring, getting there, because I really believe that there's a time for us, especially when we start getting into our 60s, 70s, and 80s, that I'm not in my 80s, but that we have to, light the torch so others can come up and carry on where we're at. And one of that individual that over the course, and there were about 2 or 3 individuals that I worked with, but the individual showed that he cared about the community. Our values aligned, our visions aligned, and that was Rob Johnson. And so when I announced my retirement, I immediately endorsed him, hoping that, we have made room, actually created that path for somebody younger, to step up.
And if he gets elected, what do you hope he does with the position?
Well, first of all, he's got to know that, I'm going to hold him accountable, and I'm going to ask the community to hold him accountable. And I hope he keeps people first, and, him and I talk all the time. I'm hoping that he looks at legislation, and it's not about how many bills you put in. It's the bills that you put in with substance that align with the issues that help the people. You have 100 individuals in the House. you have 50 in the Senate. So you don't have to put in every bill. You don't have to try to think of every bill. So I'm hoping that he does that. I'm hoping he looks at the bill that will be able to enhance, especially those marginalized communities.
Yeah. Well, being a legislator is just one of the hats out of many that you've worn. You were a part of the school board for the Des Moines Public School Board. How was your time on that?
Challenging, very challenging, because again, I got elected to the school board not running to run, but I won, and I made a deal with individuals. In fact, our mayor, Connie Bozen, her and I ran against each other for the school board. Thank God there was 2 seats, because I don't think I could have won, because Connie's awesome. But when I came in, our school books were years behind. I always take a joke. I said, we had our high school students still thinking that Abraham Lincoln was president. So the key was, where do we get the money? So I made a deal with my colleagues on the school board. They were going to allow me to write and get $1 million for to update our school books. At that same time, we had a midterm cut. And so we ended up, I only got 500,000 instead of $1 million, because we needed the other 500,000 to keep our teachers employed. So that was the deal that was made. So it was always challenging, to be able to have enough money in the budget to make sure that Polk County and that the Des Moines district had the wherewithal to educate our babies, and plus support our teachers. Because even back at that time, oh my God, teachers were coming out of their own pocket, as some of them are doing today, just to make sure they have what their children have. And that's what we have to be able to look at. How do we help them? And how do we do that as a community? And I say that to people that, watch this program, there's nothing wrong with the little extra money you have in your pocket as a community person, to go up and ask teachers, what do you need? If you need chalk, if you need pens, there's nothing wrong with going to and picking up 3 or 4 boxes of pen and just dropping it off and say, hey, if this helps, thank you. We just want to do whatever little we can.
Right, but education is not even just the realm. You've kind of done a lot of advocacy work for the city of Des Moines, but also Iowa, even being a lieutenant in the Black Panthers group back in the day. Can you talk to me about your experience being a Black Panther?
Yeah, well, I tell people, that, and people around me say don't say that, but, I'm the worst politician you could ever meet. I'm horrible, because I use my politics, and my position to help me deal with my community activism. Because I'm a community activist. That's what I am, and that's what I want people to understand. Community activist and peacekeeper. If nothing else is said about me, I want those 2 things said. I don't want people to say he was a politician, because the definition of politician in this day and age is not the best, But community activist and peacekeeper, that's what I've always been about. In the Black Panther Party, when I joined the Black Panther Party, now here's the ironic part. We took the school board at that time. Now understand, I'm like 17 years old, and I got my black tam, a black leather jacket, and there was 6 of us that went and issued 16 demands to the Des Moines School Board. And the first demand on that was we wanted Black history, to be a core course instead of an elective course, because we felt if we start with Black history, then we could get women's history. We could get really all of history. Instead of his story, we would have history. That was it. I understand 2024, fighting for the same thing in the House of Representatives. The other ironic part of it, we wanted a strong teacher union. That was number 2. So we've been fighting, and I've been fighting for teachers ever since I've been 17 years old. So making the transition from there to the House, I tell people I'm still a Panther, our free breakfast program that we started, I still feed people at Creative Vision. You know, this is embedded in me as where I see my life. You know, Mark Twain, who I like as an author, you know, but he has a saying. He said there are two important days in your life: the day you are born and the day you find out why. You know, I was blessed as a youngster at 9, 10 years old to find out why. I knew I wanted to be a servant of people. I knew I wanted to help people. And I give my life to that. You know, even when I was younger, I told my grandfather I was going to be a doctor and take care of him. It was always about how, you know, you serve people. And at 10 and 11, and I got to give it to my sister because she really started me off with that because she's 5 years younger than me, but she was there and she didn't have a bicycle. She came to me one day and asked me, she said, I want a bicycle, I want a bicycle. The key with that, not only did I see and notice my sister and that didn't have a bicycle, majority of the kids in the neighborhood didn't have a bicycle. So I started, you know, say through my entrepreneur, you know, bringing up, which was a little dumb, but what I felt, you know, I was ambitious. I started building bicycles for kids in the neighborhood, you know. And my sister got a bicycle and she talked about it at the retirement event we had. And she remembered, you know, I had this banana seat on it and everything else. But she got a bicycle, but so did other kids in the neighborhood, you know. And what hit me harder with that, and I realized I was doing what I wanted to do, I got everybody a bicycle but me. And all my life has always been making sure everybody has it, and if I did get it, I was the last one to do so. And that's the way I live my life even now.
Obviously, with your association with that group, that caused a lot of turmoil with your well-being in Des Moines. Even with your kindness that you speak about, you know, were you paid that same respect out in the community during those times?
No, not at all. You know, they appreciated the Panther Party, but yeah, it was a difficult time because you had those individuals that had such a misconception of what the Panther Party was about, you know. And we were the only chapter that the headquarters was blowing up. And there were 6 of us in there at that time. If class had not been late, I would not be with you now having this interview. And it actually damaged a multitude of houses in that area. I think about 30, if I'm not mistaken. And the neighbor's house next door was, whole side of the house was just gone. And the back where we had our class was totally demolished. So, you know, everyone didn't agree with our philosophy and the work that we were doing. People in the community didn't know, you know, whether they would accept us or not, but they liked the fact that we had a free breakfast program. They liked the fact that we set up a free clothing program. They liked the fact that we were policing the area and that we were dealing with the drugs coming in the community at that time. And being a lieutenant, I was in charge of distribution of the Black Panther newspaper, which gave me some skills and to be able to meet individuals. But it was also, to be honest, it was very traumatic because the majority of people that I met were killed, you know. And that is when I didn't realize how traumatic that was. But now, the last 3 or 4 years, I realize how I internalized that, but I never dealt with that and with my personal well-being. So ever since I've been 17 years old, I've been dealing with death. From the Panther Party to when I worked at Urban Dreams to creating Creative Visions. You know, it's been dealing with death, including my own son.
Can you talk to me about the death of your son?
The death of my son made me question everything that I was about. because he was changing his life. He belonged to one of the street organizations, and he was changing his life around. And he actually called me like on December 8th, I think it was or so, and said, hey, I want to come work for you. I want to change my life around. So that was exciting for me. You know, my ego got this big. You know, here my son was coming to help carry on my legacy. So my ego was big. So I told him I'll be back in town. And that was on the 10th. And I was sitting in front of Creative Visions waiting for him. I was in the van because, you know, my son, and I don't know where he got this from, but he thought it was God's gift to women. You know, that didn't come from me. I want to be very clear. But I knew I had to thump him in his head because he would have his shirt open. It was cold outside and snow was coming down. I knew I had to give him a thump. And just as I was sitting there waiting, a car pulled up and said, you know, Bigger Ko, you need to get to the hospital. As a parent, and most parents that are hearing this know, you got this innate, you know, sense. And I knew my son was no longer with me. You know, so it took me a few minutes. I got to the hospital. It was full of young people. And the administration thought I was there to help them deal with the young people until somebody said, that's little Ko's father, that's Bigger Ko. And they walked me back, you know, and was trying to put me in a room. And I said, no, I want to see my baby. It was the longest walk to that date, to today. I've never had a walk like that in my life. And, you know, it was like a movie, like no matter how many steps I took, that corridor got longer and longer. Finally, I went through the steel doors, and there lay my son with a hole in his chest. You know, it took a lot out of me, you know, to see my baby laying there, you know, emotionally, physically, mentally. It all just was sucked out of me. I knew I had the young people out there that were getting antsy, and I didn't want to see them get in trouble and go to jail. And so after some business was taken care of, I walked outside to get some air, and I looked over in the police car, and there was a young man sitting there that I knew, and I knew my son. So I asked the police officer if I could talk to him because I wanted to ask him what happened. And as soon as I sat in the car, he looked at me and said, how's little Ko? And I said, little Ko's dead, you know. And so he was reaching for me, and I was reaching for him to give him a hug when he said, as he got to my ear, I didn't mean to kill him. And whatever little I had left, just because I didn't know what to do. You know, my legs were rubbery, and, you know, here I was hugging another young man who actually shot my son and has my son on a gurney. So, you know, at that time, the police officer knocked on the window. I get out the car, you know, and I go back inside because the administration said, we don't know what to do. The young people are saying they want to see little Ko's body, or they're going to tear up the hospital and that type of thing. So they asked me, what can we do? I said, do you have a room that they can walk past and see his body? You know, and they said, yeah, and that's what we did. And they went through and, you know, saw his body, and finally I got to my car and I drove up to Creative Visions and looked at the wall because I knew my son's name now was going on the wall with the other young men and women that had been shot. You know, so then I went home and I sat in the middle of my floor and kept my door open because all I wanted at that time was somebody just to come by, you know, and say, let's go for a ride, because I couldn't drive. I wanted somebody just to come down there and just sit. No one came. So I sat on the floor, you know, and I couldn't cry because I was processing. And that daylight came, I took a shower and went over to Creative Visions because I knew his friends would be there. And then the other turnaround was that 3 days into preparing for his funeral, you know, the young man's mother called me and said, Brother Ko, I need you. They're threatening to kill my son because he shot your son, and you're the only one who could keep him alive. And that just, again, understand, the stuff is just being sucked out of me and everything, and I have no one to turn to talk to. So now I'm internalizing, I'm trying to do it, I'm questioning myself and everything else. Long story short, I went down, talked to the mother, talked to the son. I came back, called a press conference. You know, they went and got him, they came up, and I told them that day that this day I forgive him, but I would not forgive if anybody would hurt him. And then I took him to my house to stay in my house until we could get him somewhere safe. Now, does that make me angelic? No, not at all. It was the right thing to do.
Do you think that set the foundation for Creative Visions and your Curb Violence program? Now you work with families who go through what you went through, and it almost seems like that was the first time that you've navigated it like that, and now you're translating it to others. Is that fair to say?
Very fair to say. It was the foundation. It was seriously the foundation, because, you know, I mean, I know what a parent feels like, losing a loved one. And there was times that I would be sitting on the couch and the young man was laying on the floor that, you know, I thought about, I could probably brick him up in the basement. Nobody would ever find out. And then I had to catch myself, you know, of saying, why did you do what you do? You know, is this something you want to continue doing? You know, and so, yeah, so it was like building that, because it seemed like after that, everything that happened, the death of young people, you know, the shootings, you know, dealing with parents, it seemed to escalate. And so, and then dealing with the young people. And like even today, I'm dealing with young people, and my staff are dealing with young people that I dealt with their fathers and their mothers. I'm dealing now with their children and some of their grandchildren, which is disheartening, but we realize it's generational. So now it's like, how do we deal with this, not cosmetically, but systemically, so we can break that generational gap? And I really honestly believe we found a way to do it. You know, with our wraparound services, with the VIP program, we found a way, you know, to really address that.
Well, your work with Creative Visions isn't over, and a lot of things that you do in the community isn't over, even though your time with the legislature is. Can you talk to me about how you plan to spend your retirement?
Well, I have 2 more years with Creative Visions. When I started 4 years ago on a 4-year succession plan. You know, 2 more years as a legislator, 2 more years as CEO of Creative Visions. After that 4-year period, then I'm working now on doing workshops. I have created, you know, a workshop called From Pain to Power, which has 10 steps on how to turn your pain into power. I'm working on my book now, you know, and not just writing. I'm really focused in on the book, and the book will be called The Journey, you know, so I'm working on that and working on my workshops and to solidify Creative Visions.
I hear work, 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 work. Is there a little time for some vacation and some family time too, Akeo?
Well, I'm working on that. At the retirement event, I told my family then, I said, you know, for over 18 years, I've been promised y'all a barbecue. I said, now y'all plan the barbecue and I can do the barbecue at my house. You know, we have a barbecue, but I do plan to take some time off. It was last year, actually, that I was spent. I was totally spent emotionally. And I knew I had to get out of here, so I called my sister and said, I can't spend Christmas with you. I said, I got to get out of here. So I went to Jamaica, you know, and I spent 5 beautiful days in Jamaica, and show you where my head was at. And I'm saying this for other people out there now, you know, I was scheduled to do 10 days, but I feel guilty doing a whole 10 days because I felt I was doing an injustice, so I only spent 5. But I realized during that time, it was okay to really learn how to love yourself. And that's what I'm doing at my life right now. I'm learning to love me, you know, because where I was at before, I was really heading down that dark path that I wouldn't have been no good to anybody, especially myself. But now, I'm working on that, you know, And I tell groups, especially African American men, it's okay to talk about depression. It's okay to talk about those issues that we're scared to talk about because we think we'll be labeled and everything else. But if you don't talk about it, you don't learn to love yourself, you're doing more harm to yourself, and you really can't help anybody else. So this is what I plan to do. But yes, vacation is on the horizon. You know, in fact, several places that I'm outlining where I want to go. You know, I actually have 10 acres of land in Kenya,
okay.
You know, that I plan to work with. The Liberian community, I'm working with them to go to Liberia, you know, and I'm looking at some other spots. You know, I want to go to Barbados.
Longer than 5 days, Akeo. That's all we're asking.
I will, in the first time in my life, you know, to understand, I'm 72 years old, be 73 this year. The first time in my life, I am planning a 2-week vacation. I've never had a 2-week vacation, and I'm gonna have one. And it's gonna be on the beach, you know, somewhere I can swim in the water and don't worry about sharks. So, you know, I'm gonna enjoy myself, you know, and because it's necessary for my next chapter. It's necessary because I can't teach something if I'm not a good student at it, you know, and if I don't show by example. You know, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't want to tell other people this is the rest you need, and I'm not taking that rest because I did that for decades.
Well, we're wishing you all the rest, all the days in Kenya, Jamaica, wherever you want to go. We hope you take care of yourself, and we thank you for joining us today, Akeo.
Thank you. Thank you for this interview. I appreciate you.
Yes, ditto.
Okay.